Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel where I read stories aloud for your entertainment. And today we are going to hear one of the Grimm fairy tales. I've been reading these a bit lately, and I've decided today we're going to go for Red Riding Hood, which I always forget is a Grimm fairy tale, and I don't know how I forget that, but here we are. I told you that I would give you a couple facts before starting my readings as I went forward. So, one, obviously, as we know, the Grimm brothers didn't usually have original content, so they borrowed from other places. Red Riding Hood was originally written by a French writer in the 1600s, late 1600s. His name was Charles Perrault, and I'm really sorry about that pronunciation, but he was a French writer, and he wrote the original tale of Red Riding Hood, and he wanted to create a moral tale and use it as a cautionary tale to say what happens to people who don't listen, specifically young ladies who perhaps encounter men with poor moral compasses, let's say, or have ill thoughts, and they engage in conversation with them or they're led astray by them. And he wanted to show what happens to young girls when they don't stay on the straight and narrow. And so in his version, it's dark. Both Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother are eaten, and it's the ultimate stranger danger story. And while I totally get that it's a product of its time, I still feel some type of way about... It's really harsh, okay? It's really harsh. She's getting eaten. Why? Because she talked to someone? Whatever. Product of the time. We're moving on. Anyway, eventually, years later, when the Grimm brothers are even born and they're, doing their thing, they hear about the tale of Red Riding Hood and they hear different versions of it. So what they do is compile what they know and they actually make it into an original story, and then they come up with a sequel where Red Riding Hood and her grandmother encounter the wolf again later. Now, a lot of fairy tales that we know, the versions of Red Riding Hood, will combine those tales into one story. And we'll see if our story is like that. And last fact, the original name of Red Riding Hood was not Red Riding Hood because the translation worked out to Red Riding Hood, but she didn't actually wear a hood. She wore a cap. So she was known as Red Riding Cap. Little Red Cap, I think, actually was the original title. So, yeah, who knew? All right, here we go. Little Red Riding Hood, composed by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, there lived a sweet little girl who was beloved by everyone who saw her. But her grandmother was so excessively fond of her that she never knew when to give the child enough. One day the grandmother presented the little girl with a red velvet riding hood, and as it fitted her very well, she would never wear anything else, and so she was called Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother said to her, "Come, Red Riding Hood, here is a piece of nice meat and a bottle of wine. Take these to your grandmother. She is ill and weak and will relish them. Make haste. Before she gets up, go quietly and carefully, and do not run, lest you should fall and break the bottle, and then your grandmother will get nothing. When you go into her room, do not forget to say, 'Good morning,' and do not look about in all the corners." "I will do everything as you wish," replied Red Riding Hood, taking her mother's hand. The grandmother dwelt far away in the wood, half an hour's walk from the village, and as Red Riding Hood entered among the trees, she met a wolf, but she did not know what a malicious beast it was, and so she was not at all afraid. "Good day, Little Red Riding Hood," he said. "Many thanks, wolf," said she. "Whither away so early, Little Red Riding Hood?" "To my grandmother's," she replied. What are you carrying under your apron? Meat and wine, she answered. Yesterday we baked the meat that grandmother, who was ill and weak, might have something nice and strengthening. Where does your grandmother live? Asked the wolf. A good quarter of an hour's walk further into the forest. The cottage stands under 3 great oak trees. Near it are some nut bushes, by which you will easily know it. But the wolf thought to himself, she is a nice, tender thing, and will taste better than the old woman. I must act craftily, that I may snap them both up. Presently, he came up again to Little Red Riding Hood, and said, Just look at the beautiful flowers which grow around you. Why do you not look about you? I believe you don't hear how beautifully the birds sing. You walk on as if you were going to school. See how merry everything is around you in the forest. So Little Red Riding Hood opened her eyes, and when she saw how the sunbeams glanced and danced through the trees, and what splendid flowers were blooming in her path, she thought, if I take my grandmother a fresh nosegay, she will be very pleased. And it is so very early that I can, even then, get there in good time. And running into the forest, she looked about for flowers. But when she had once begun, she did not know how to leave off, and kept going deeper and deeper among the trees in search of some more beautiful flower. The wolf, however, ran straight to the house of the old grandmother and knocked at the door. Who's there? Asked the old lady. Only Little Red Riding Hood, bringing you some meat and wine, please, if you open the door, replied the wolf. Lift up the latch, cried the grandmother. I am too weak to get up. So the wolf lifted the latch, and the door flew open, and jumping without a word on the bed, he gobbled up the poor old lady. Then he put on her clothes and tied her cap over his head, got into the bed, and drew the blankets over him. All this time Red Riding Hood was still gathering flowers, and when she had plucked as many as she could carry, she remembered her grandmother and made haste to the cottage. She wondered very much to see the door wide open, and when she got into the room, she began to feel very ill and exclaimed, Oh, sad I feel. I wish I had not come today. Then she said, Good morning, but received no answer. So she went up to the bed and drew back the curtains, and there lay her grandmother, as she thought, with the cap drawn half over her eyes, looking very fiercely. Oh, grandmother, what great ears you have! The better to hear with, was the reply. And what great eyes you have! The better to see with. And what great hands you have! The better to touch you with. But, grandmother, what great teeth you have! The better to eat you with. And scarcely were the words out of his mouth when the wolf made a spring out of bed and swallowed up poor Little Red Riding Hood. As soon as the wolf had thus satisfied his appetite, he laid himself down again in the bed and began to snore very loudly. A huntsman passing by overheard him and thought, How loudly the old lady snores! I must see if she wants anything. So he stepped into the cottage, and when he came to the bed, he saw the wolf lying in it. What? Do I find you here, you old sinner? I have long sought you, he exclaimed, taking aim with his gun. Then, just as he was about to fire, it occurred to him that the wolf might have devoured the grandmother, and that he might still save her. So, instead of firing, he took a pair of scissors and began to cut open the belly of the sleeping wolf. After 2 snips, he saw the little red hood, and after 2 more snips, the little girl sprang out crying, Oh, how frightened I have been! It was so dark inside the wolf. And then the old grandmother came out, also alive, but scarcely able to breathe. Little Red Riding Hood ran outside and found some big stones, and they put them in the wolf's belly. When he woke up, he tried to run away, but the stones were so heavy that he collapsed and fell dead. Then all three were happy. The huntsman skinned the wolf and took the skin. The grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine Little Red Riding Hood had brought and felt better at once. As for Little Red Riding Hood, she said to herself, "I will never again leave the path and run into the woods when my mother has told me not to." Some folks say that this story is not the true one, but that one day, when Red Riding Hood was taking some baked meats to her grandmother's, a wolf met her and wanted to lead her astray. But she went straight on and told her grandmother that she had met a wolf who wished her good day, but he looked so wickedly out of his great eyes, as if he would have eaten her had she not been on the high road. So the grandmother said, "Let us shut the door, that he may not enter." Soon after came the wolf, who knocked and exclaimed, "I am Red Riding Hood, grandmother. I bring you some roast meat." But they kept quiet still and did not open the door, so the wolf, creeping several times around the house, at last jumped onto the roof, intending to wait till Red Riding Hood went home in the evening, and then to sneak after her and devour her in the darkness. The woman, however, saw all that the rascal intended, and as there stood before the door a great stone trough, she said to Little Red Riding Hood, "Take this pail, child. Yesterday I boiled some sausages in water, so pour it into that stone trough." Red Riding Hood poured many times until the huge trough was quite full. Then the wolf sniffed the smell of the sausages and smacked his lips and wished very much to taste. And at last he stretched his neck too far over so that he lost his balance and slipped quite off the roof right into the great trough beneath, wherein he was drowned. And Red Riding Hood ran home in high glee. But no one sorrowed for Mr. Wolf. And that is Grimm's Fairy Tales, Red Riding Hood. I hope you enjoyed. And yeah, so this tale ends in a much more pleasant way than its previous editions and forms. So Red Riding Hood lives, her grandmother lives, go team, the big bad wolf. Not so much. He does not get a happy ending, but also he probably shouldn't, right? He's the villain. If you liked this video and would like me to read specific stories, you can put specific stories or books in the comments of this video. Just remember that everything has to be public domain or I'm infringing upon copyright and I can't do that. And if you need reminders for when new videos come out, you can subscribe to this page and I will put the link to do that in the description of this video. And I hope everybody at home is safe and healthy and enjoying their time. And until next time, have good days.